Let's step inside the mind of Peter Eisenman, an architect who believes buildings aren't just for living in, but for thinking through. For him, architecture isn't about comfort or function. It's about unsettling what we expect, breaking frames, and opening up endless possibilities. This is an exploration of how Eisenman redefines the very meaning of architecture. Peter Eisenman, a New York-based architect, is known for his radical deconstructivist philosophies, often designing against functionalism and instead using architecture as a medium for thought that unsettles and destabilizes conventional notions of space. To him, it means to deliberately resist the idea that architecture should represent fixed meanings and conformity, and he believes that meaning lies in the process of generation and the exploration of its endless possibilities. For Eisenman, the meaning of architecture is to be a critical, autonomous and an intellectual practice, which challenges convention and produces ways of thinking about space and culture like philosophy and literature. Watch this brief interview clip, where he discusses his philosophy and his criticism of modern technology.
Technology is a cruel tool because what it does is defer the possibility of a student being creative. The student can take an algorithm, produce 50 alternatives to the same problem. What it does is take away from you the possibility of value judgment. What are the values inherent in the production of these alternatives? It has, to me, no value in producing what I consider to be an architecture of, let's say, resistance, right? There's no algorithm for resistance. That comes from reading philosophy, reading comparative literature. To me, to be an architect, you have to be educated. And what you would take on a desert island if you're an architect is not a computer. You take 10 books.
Cardboard theory. Eisenman's cardboard theories originated from his axonometric designs on thin cardboard sheets. His final houses looked like they were diagrams, with how paper-thin and flimsy they were, seeming more abstract and diagrammatic rather than functional and livable. The structures in his house series felt wrong. Staircases didn't connect properly, there were pillars in odd places, and openings were scattered throughout, making occupants feel uncomfortable and pushing them to look beyond their expectations of comfort and functionality. Education. Eisenman originally began his studies at Cornell, a prestigious Ivy League school, as a chemistry major. Following in his father's footsteps, on the verge of being expelled, he found himself in deep conversation with his dorm counselor, a fifth-year architecture student, whom he often watched sketch and model with great fascination. In a later interview with Cornell, he explained how, in his mind, he thought, a boy never took art. Immediately, he went to switch his degree to architecture, sacrificing his dreams of competitive swimming at Yale. Academic influences. Formalism by Colin Rowe. Eisenman was sent to Cambridge, England in the 1960s to meet and study under Colin Rowe. His influence was a major turning point in Eisenman's thinking. Rowe emphasized that architecture should be valued through its formal qualities, proportion, geometry, and spatial relation over function, technology, and social meaning. His essay on the mathematics of the ideal villa compares Palladio and Le Corbusier to show how these architects use formal systems to formulate structure and order, believing form is relatively autonomous. Noam Chomsky and linguistic theory. Chomsky's theory suggests that the human mind is pre-equipped with a set of linguistic constraints, referred to as universal grammar, which provides a structural foundation across all languages. This theory forms the theoretical framework for Eisenman's designs, believing that buildings have a deeper structure beneath their surface-level meaning. His book Reworking Eisenman explains the relationship between the grammatical prefabrication of structure, within text and translation to the use of voids, formal systems and functions in architecture, relating back to his beliefs that the iterative design process is more valuable than the external structure. Jacques Derrida and deconstructivism. Celebrated as the founder of deconstruction, believed texts and cultural works don't have a single or fixed meaning, and that meaning is unstable and contradictory. His ideologies include the theory that deconstruction exposes the instabilities of structures in society that we think are stable, which Eisenman applies in his ideologies about challenging traditional architectural notions and creating unsettling forms. Gestalt theories. Gestalt theories by Max Wertheimer as German for unified whole. The idea that humans recognize and group similar patterns and other elements together, so it becomes aesthetically pleasing and easy to understand. Famous work. These are some examples of the type of work Peter Eisenman produces, both physical buildings and concepts like the virtual house. One short example is this Jewish memorial that avoids figurative symbols and sentimentality. Instead, it uses abstraction to show architecture as its own discourse rather than a narrative monument. Eisenman also produced a series of experimental projects, called the House series, which were the embodiment of his theory of autonomous structure, where some houses were built into physical structures, and others remained as concepts, one of which, House 6, we will be looking into as our case study. House 6 was designed through abstract transformations of a grid. In this project, Eisenman deliberately rejected architectural function. He disrupted it through his idea of violence, using methods like columns cutting through circulation, misaligned stairs with missing railings, floating planes, a glass floor placed right in the middle of the kitchen, and even a column that doesn't reach the ceiling. Instead of focusing on the finished product, Eisenman treated the house as what he called a frozen diagram. It wasn't about a polished finale, but about making the design process itself visible in built form. Now, if we compare him to architects like Alvar Aalto or Le Corbusier, their work was rooted in human comfort and functional needs, an ideology shaped by the devastation of World War I, when architecture was urgently needed to provide shelter, order, and dignity to society. Eisenman emerged in the very different climate of the 1960s, stable and free from those immediate crises. Instead, his residential designs forced clients to adapt to rigid, self-referential logics. This was a direct manifestation of his belief in architectural autonomy, that a building's purpose was not primarily to serve its users, but to operate as an independent formal system. House 6 was built in 1975, before deconstructivism was formally named in the late 1980s. So, rather than following a trend, it stands as an early experiment. Plan. House 6 was generated from a 9-square diagram, then shifted and cut to form walls, voids, and columns. The pathways in this house are deliberately interrupted. For example, the stairs and partitions are misplaced, and even 2 columns stand right in the middle of the kitchen, disrupting flow and unsettling perception. The awkward layouts make it clear this house is about intellectual discourse, not shelter. Residents have to walk to the furthest corner of the second floor just to reach the bathroom, and the bedroom is left open to the outside due to a middle partition in the room. So overall, the plan records Eisenman's diagrammatic transformations, rather than prioritizing comfort or function. Volume. In this axonometric, Eisenman represents volume not as a solid block, but as intersecting planes and colored axes. The gaps and voids disrupt enclosure, showing that the volume is generated through process and diagrammatic shifts rather than traditional functional space. Section. The section follows the act of a conceptual gesture, following the 9-square grid but in a vertical form. Structure. House 6 was constructed using simple materials, mainly timber, plywood panels, and concrete, but was built in unconventional ways. Eisenman's design doesn't conceal the structure. Instead, it exposes the design process, letting the materials tell the story. Let's review the summary of Eisenman's philosophies we discussed. 1. Peter Eisenman is a radical deconstructivist who rejects functionalism and challenges conventional meanings, encouraging critical and autonomous design through the iterative design project. 2. He believes architectural meaning lies in its generative process, and is akin to philosophy and literature in the way it challenges conventions and produces new ways of thinking. 3. Examples of his design process in practice are the House series, which were developed from his philosophies of a diagrammatic and intentionally dysfunctional process. 4. Used architecture as a medium for thought that unsettles and destabilizes conventional notions of space. And finally, 5. He had many key influences who shaped his perception of architecture, including Colin Rowe, Jacques Derrida and Noam Chomsky. And that wraps up Eisenman's reflections on what architecture means to him. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. Here are our references, and at the end of the list you'll find the link to Eisenman's interview if you'd like to explore further. Thank you once again. Bye for now.